What's going on, y'all? Machiavelli Mills TV. So now it's time to talk about my boy, Chicago's own Patrick Beverley, making his tour around ESPN studios, right? So this week or this past week, this week, not past week, starting on Monday, Patrick Beverley has been on every single show on ESPN, right? Making his run, giving his unfiltered opinion about different players, different situations across the NBA. One of those players happens to be Chris Paul, a guy that Patrick Beverley pushed like he was a 15 player on the roster. Pat Bev pushed Chris Paul like he was a 15 man on the roster that just made the team coming up from the G League. For real, like he was a nobody. That's the way Pat pushed him, right? And so, now that we've seen Chris Paul and the Phoenix Suns eliminated and embarrassed in that Game 7 against the Dallas Mavericks, Patrick Beverley gave his take on the game and also Chris Paul. Now, what Chris Paul has said it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. He ruffled some feathers. Patrick Beverley basically said that in a nutshell, when Monty Williams benched DeAndre Ayton, he benched the wrong player. He should have benched Chris Paul because Chris was not playing well at all. Chris was playing terrible. That's a fact. He was, right? He said he should have brought Chris in and out of the lineup. He should have benched him. He should have been bringing him in and out, but nah, don't sit here and just play through it while Chris is playing terrible. Don't have him just sitting out there playing terrible. Pat then says, I was benched before. I was benched, right? And we won the series, and nobody even remembers it because we won the series. It was what it was. His coach did whatever he had to do for the team to win, right? And Chris should have been benched. He then goes on to say how Chris has been known to manipulate calls to go his way for a long time. On the swing through, flailing his arms on the swing through, and so on and so forth in order to get petty fouls called, which they do, the officials tend to call for Chris Paul and not always other players, right? Which is true. He then goes on to say something. What else he said? Basically, that Chris doesn't get the same media coverage when he fails or when he loses in grand fashion the same way a Paul George does. He doesn't get called way off P. He don't get clowned like Paul George and maybe some other players do. The same way, Chris Paul doesn't get judged that way, which is also true. Chris doesn't get the same type of media, like he doesn't get bombarded with all this criticism from the media the same way Paul George does. And maybe it's due to the fact that Chris Paul was the president of the Players Association for years. And he's looked at as an ambassador for the league, and they don't want to taunt him or they don't want to taint him in a certain type of way. They'll criticize him, but not staunchly the same way they do Paul George. And he doesn't see why if the failures are nearly the same or even worse for Chris Paul. And I believe that's true. But you got under people like Matt, what's my boy name? Y'all know my boy, man. What's my boy name? Matt Barnes from All the Smoke. Matt Barnes comes out and says that basically Pat Beverley disrespected Chris Paul. He disrespectful. Pat was never like that, so who is he to talk about anybody? Chris is going to be remembered as an all-time great. They're not going to remember Pat Beverley, so on and so forth. And Pat would tell you that's true. Pat admitted that Chris Paul is one of the best point guards to ever play this game. Surefire Hall of Famer. Two things can be true, though. Right? Chris Paul could be a surefire Hall of Famer. The league people are going to remember Chris Paul way more than they're ever going to remember Pat Beverley. That is true. Pat was never like that as an offensive player, which is true, right? But also, Chris Paul does manipulate the league, the officials, to getting a lot of calls. Chris always been the type of person throwing his head back. He's been doing that for years. I was a fan of Chris Paul for the longest of time, right? That was my favorite point guard for years until D Rose got in the league. But that was my favorite point guard for a while, right? Not for a year, because D Rose got in the league 08. But even when D Rose was in the league, he was one of my favorite point guards, period, right? But I always saw how Chris played. Always played to draw the foul all the time. Whenever something happens where he's called for a foul, or Chris can be an abrasive person, over the top. He can be he mocks players a lot. Mocks coaches a lot, does a lot of shiesty little low ball, he does he got a lot of antics to him that a lot of people don't see, or he tries to hide like he does nothing wrong. Chris do a lot of shit, a lot of little antics, a lot of bullshit he be doing. He talk a whole lot of shit. So when things like when Chris Paul gets eliminated, I don't feel bad for Chris. The way Chris always been a player that manipulate calls to go his way. He always been a player that's been, for the most part, covered by the media. Nobody really goes in on Chris the way they should have when he has certain debacles or certain meltdowns. LeBron James has got a large amount of criticism, way more than Chris Paul has, right? And we know LeBron is 2 tiers above Chris as a player, right? So Pat wasn't saying nothing wrong. Matt is just sensitive. Matt Barnes is sensitive because Chris Paul is his boy. That's his dog, right? He played with Chris for years as his teammate. He rocked with him, right? I understand that. That's your boy. You're gonna defend him. But what was wrong about what Pat said? Now, Pat said he's not a good defender. Nobody wakes up. Nobody goes to sleep. I forgot about that part. Nobody goes to sleep stressing about playing Chris Paul. Now, while I may think that may not be true because Chris has had some great games, I don't know because I'm not an NBA player. It may look different to other players who have good defensive skill set that may be like, I'm not worried about what Chris can do, right? Even though Chris has had great games against Pat, that's for sure. So that may be some little other whatever what Pat is saying with that. You know what I'm saying? But I got to see how many times Chris has went off against Pat to really say that. He went off against Pat in the playoffs last year for sure in that last game. But I got to see how often Chris goes off against Pat. Nonetheless, man, I can't say if players really go to sleep or if they lick their chops at Chris Paul or not. I don't know. But I do know that Chris has manipulated plays that go his way for a long time. Chris be on some bullshit, mocking play. You saw how he mocked Steve Kerr. That time acting like he laughing. He's laughed at officials, trying to mock officials, right? People don't care about the officials, so people don't give no fuck about that. I've seen him talk shit to players a whole lot, talk crazy to players, right? I've seen him attempt to stretch his arm out to help a player on the opposing team get up and then take his arm back and walk off and talk shit. I've seen Chris do that a lot of times. I don't feel like I need to come out. So for all these people feeling like they need to come out and cover Chris Paul, Chris is a grown-ass man. He'll be okay, right? Like, Pat didn't say Chris was trash. He didn't say I'm better than Chris or nothing like that. He said defensively, Chris is not that strong. People lick their chops against Chris. People don't stress about playing Chris Paul the next day. He said Chris manipulates calls to go his way. Like he said a lot of, I don't know about the people don't stress about playing Chris Paul, but the other stuff was true. Chris don't get the same type of criticism. It is what it is. And what is crazy about it is Dame Dollar. You got my boy Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard coming out talking about Pat ain't that dude. Pat talking about this, talking about disclosing private conversations, all of that. And Pat, he doing something the wrong way. He on some other. We know Dame and Pat had their little back and forth spat last year. I mean, in the bubble. We know that happened. So it is what it is. Not last year, the year before last, in the bubble, 2020. So maybe Dame coming out on that. But other than that, I'm like, Dame, why is you coming out speaking about some stuff that ain't got? Is Chris your man's like that? Or maybe he is and we don't know, but why Dame feel like he got to come out and say something against Pat for Pat going on ESPN saying that? I don't know why, but Dame felt the need to do so. And part of that, I love Dame's game as a player. I really do. But a part of me feel like Dame he is off to prove that he the realest dude alive a lot of times, all the time, to where he takes things too seriously. Like I remember when he was on the Joe Budden podcast and Maul and Rory were joking with him about certain things. And he's kind of like being snark or a little off-putting, a little bit rude or semi-confrontational on that episode of the Joe Budden podcast. Watch it. Like he's not really, Dame didn't really seem lighthearted for whatever reason. And Maul and Rory were fans of his and was just like joking or whatever, right? And Dame seemed to be like he wasn't even taking lighthearted jokes from them. And they wasn't even talking about him. They were talking about how nice he is. And he still was taking like almost seeming offended by certain things or like he was above certain questions from Rory and Maul. So sometimes Dame try to prove that he's so real. Sometimes he be like, bro, relax, bro. Like coming out and doing all this with Pat Bev, coming out and going at Pat Bev for saying some truths about Chris as a player and how Chris has covered through the media. Dame coming out going crazy at Pat, going at Pat like almost to prove that he's just some real solid dude to stand up for other players. Like, Dame, let that go. That ain't got nothing to do with you. Leave that alone. Pat ain't say nothing about that man kids, ain't said nothing about that man wife, ain't said nothing about that man's family, ain't said nothing about that man's personal life. He ain't insult that man to where he called him anything heinous or none of the sort, right? So let that go, Dame. Dame is on this quest to be so real. That's why he's staying in Portland. Because he want to be so real and seem like he the realest dude walking and breathing on planet Earth that he don't want to live Portland. Now, some of y'all going to say, how you know he just don't want to challenge himself? How you know he just don't want to do something great and achieve the unthinkable and win in Portland? Brother, he can take the L out of Lover. He ain't winning in Portland unless some big-time free agent come over there and everybody in the Western Conference is injured. In the Eastern Conference, the team that comes out of the Eastern Conference is weak or injured too. That's the only way he winning in Portland. I love Dame and I love his game. He's official, like a referee with a whistle. But the brother is not winning no championship in Portland. He can kiss that goodbye. For real, for real. So I feel like he want to be looked at as a real dude so bad, it's keeping him in Portland, right? And his wanting to identify as a real dude throughout the league got him jumping in something that ain't got nothing to do with him. Pat talking about Chris, and yeah, like, I'm looking like, man, I'm not feeling sorry for Chris. Chris talk a whole bunch of shit. He shit-star stuff and then throw his hands up in the air like he don't know what happened. He throws stones and then hide his hand a whole lot and look like I'm just the guy in the play with the Players Association. I haven't done anything. And Chris does a lot of philanthropic things for the community, for HBCUs and so on and so forth. He's been an ambassador for HBCUs, which is great. I'm a product of an HBCU. So it's amazing, all right? That's a great thing. But nonetheless, it doesn't take away from the shit talking that Chris do on the court, from the manipulating that he do for calls. Chris always throwing that head back, been doing it for years. Anybody just bump his, like, anybody brush him, if anybody brush past him, right? You come and bump up against him or brush against him. Like he do that all the time. And I love Chris's game, but it is what it is, man. Pat ain't told no lie about that dude like that, unless he talking about he ain't a good defender of guys, lick they chops at Chris. And shit, it could be the case. I don't know. Because I remember D Rose used to be on Chris Paul ass every single time they played. Every single time. But D Rose is a different type of player than Pat Bev. You know what I'm saying? D Rose was on a Pantheon great trajectory before those injuries. So it is what it is. But other than people lick their chops at Chris and Chris is like a cone, I don't get what people coming at, man. With all that, man. Pat ain't said nothing bad about that boy family or nothing, or said nothing heinous about Chris to where people got to come out and just come and protect Chris and talk shit on Pat like that, man. Relax. Machiavelli Mills TV, I'm out. Peace.